Welcome to Houston House at South by Southwest. Advancements in healthcare innovation are accelerating the delivery of life-saving solutions to patients around the globe. Today, the medical device industry generates approximately $25 billion in payroll and invests nearly $10 billion in research and development annually. The industry is fueled by innovative companies that are helping create a more equitable society by developing solutions that improve healthcare performance and outcomes. Join industry leaders as they discuss today's most revolutionary medical device technologies and the unique hybrid models leveraging the resources of larger enterprises with the agility of startup companies.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to have you all here as we have a conversation about MedTech innovation, our ecosystem in Houston, and everything exciting that's happening in our world. I'll kick off with introductions if Kevin wants to get started.
Hey everyone, Kevin Coker. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Proxima. We're a service company headquartered in Houston, and we help MedTech and biotech companies go through the FDA, and when they need to test their products in like a hospital environment, that's what our company does. I'm also principal and co-founder of M1 MedTech, which is a new MedTech accelerator.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Reinstein. I'm the CEO of Saranas, a Houston-based company, actually incubated out of the TMCX incubator there on Holcomb Boulevard in Houston. Been there about 2 years. I joined the company March of 2020. I don't know if you guys recall what was happening then, but it was an interesting time to join a new company. I actually was moving back to Houston from California. So what we do at Saranas is detect bleeds during endovascular procedures like coronary angioplasties. They go through an artery in your leg, and a lot of times you don't know you're having a bleed until it's too late. You've got a hematoma or a rapid drop in blood pressure. Our device detects that bleed before it's too late.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna. I'm with Johnson & Johnson at the Center for Device Innovation in Houston. It's a unique model that Johnson & Johnson just started a few years ago, where we actually have both internal innovation, so employees of J&J working on their own technologies for our product lines, as well as my piece, which is a portfolio of resident startups from really all around the world. That are strategically aligned with things that we're doing in J&J, and that we house and support and get to where they can be on the market and hopefully invest or acquire them. So I'm going to kick off with just a little bit of a definition game, I guess. MedTech is used very broadly, very differently for different people. So maybe we should just start with talking a little bit about our industry and why it's significant. I know, James, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I've actually been in medical devices for 30 years. I know you're thinking, I started when I was about 15, so. So I spent a lot of years with Boston Scientific, most of it living and working overseas. So I was in the European headquarters in Paris, then Mexico, then actually lived in Asia for a number of years. But then the most exotic place, we moved to Houston in 2007, and I worked for a company called now LivaNova, used to be Cyberonics. And the thing about this industry is that you're able to turn it off, and it's so. No, it's so this industry is specific to medical devices. So these are the gadgets that physicians use to make you better in surgeries and diagnostics and what have you. It's an amazing industry. It's primarily a U.S. industry. Most of we're a surplus in exports of like a 90-to-10 ratio. We employ about 400,000 people. The average salary in this industry is about 45% higher than the national average in the U.S. And most of the companies, about 80% of the companies are 50 employees or less. And almost 98% of the companies are 500 employees or less. So it's a true sort of entrepreneurial, innovative, these smaller companies are really the innovation and almost the R&D of the bigger companies like Boston Scientific, where I used to work, Medtronic, and these other companies. They get all of their R&D by acquiring companies like the one I'm running now, Saranas. So very kind of an under-the-radar type of industry, but certainly one that does a lot of good for this country.
Yeah, I think also something that's extremely mission-driven, all that stuff ultimately helps patients, like you said, and something. I think that's a big part of the reason we're all in this industry as well. I do want to kind of pivot to, as you mentioned, so much of our industry is really earlier stage, smaller companies, innovative companies. And there's a lot of perspectives represented up here, entrepreneur, investor, kind of support system, executives at bigger companies. So I'm interested to hear how everyone up here kind of thinks about when you're looking at a really early stage, whether it's a technology or a startup or whatever it might be, how are you thinking about whether that's something worth, pouring your life into as an entrepreneur, worth investing in, all of those things? How do you guys think about, some of those things? How do you evaluate those things?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. So, from our standpoint, thinking about it from like our accelerator at M1 MedTech, we certainly want, to look at things that are actually going to be meaningful changes in people's lives. So medical devices, you have different pathways, different types of products that exist, and from our standpoint, we get excited about those things that are going to make a substantial difference in someone's life, not just necessarily what they call a Me Too device, but there are those that are out there. I think from our standpoint, we want to ensure that the technology's sound and that they've got a decent understanding on what their regulatory pathway is going to be, and actually how challenging that actually will be. It's not like a lot of companies, like a software company or a consumer product company, where you come up with an idea and then you develop your product and then you're looking to figure out how to go to market. You obviously have to go through a regulatory process, which is can be at times arduous and costly. And at the end of the day, regardless of whether the FDA requires you to go through that, through like a clinical trial process, you're probably going to have to do that to sell, because your customers are physicians. And so we want to make sure that we see those companies that have good plans at the very beginning, and that have a really capable team. I think that's probably the other half of things. For those of you who are investors, and James has been an investor for a long time, you end up betting as much or more on the team as you do the product. And if you have a great product but the team's not there, then it's likely something that we at M1 or Proxima may not be willing to support.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. For me, I'm not very smart, so I have to keep things kind of simple. So when I look at a new technology, I think of 4 questions. 1, does it work? And that may seem kind of simple, but the device just can't be a neat idea that you've dreamed up, kind of like a drop of blood can tell you 200 tests, right? It has to work. And then next, can you prove that it works? Can you prove it to regulators? Can you prove it to, as Kevin mentioned, to your customers? Because ultimately the clinicians and the administrators of hospitals are going to have to buy it. And so you really have to prove it through clinical studies is the pathway. The third question is, can you build it? And that requires, therefore, design and design for manufacturing. And not only can you build it, but can you protect it? Meaning IP, and do you have the intellectual property in place? And then finally, and it's not the least of which, and you really have to think this from the beginning, is can you get it paid for? Because the gutter is polluted with great technologies that physicians want and love, but it's not getting paid for, so it never gets any traction. And if you can answer all 4 of those questions with a yes or a somewhere, I can get to yes, then that's an investable product to go after.
Yeah, I think To just add on to that, I think it gets so complicated especially if you're an entrepreneur kind of just starting out in this world, to have to think about, I may have a prototype or something like that today, but I have to think all the way out into 5-6 years from now about that clinical study, about what it's going to look like to meet with the FDA and talk with them and convince them that this is worth, proving or clearing, and then also even further down the road, getting this paid for. But I do think that there are more and more, resources kind of available to folks, stuff like Proxima that will meet with startups. I think that wasn't a thing that existed a few years ago even, that are willing to kind of support that early stage entrepreneur. So that's definitely, I think, one of the challenges is just the depth of knowledge that you have to have at such an early stage. What are some other challenges you guys have seen startups in our world facing at this time?
Cool. There we go. Yeah, funding. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's the big one. And even though we've come off a record year in some aspects, it's still really challenging to raise money. And it was certainly challenging 2 years ago, like when you were joining Saranas. I mean, the world kind of shut down. People weren't making decisions. There were so many companies that pivoted into COVID, companies that really had absolutely no business doing that. In fact, you guys were, out of the companies I was familiar with, but Saranas may have been one of the few that didn't, because you didn't have but everybody was searching for that pivot into COVID, and they ended up, wasting a lot of time and resources, and there's, a graveyard of technology out there that companies, a lot of these MedTech companies, they're bootstrapped. They've got, a few $100,000 or even less on a credit card. They pivoted into COVID, and now they've failed. So that's unfortunate. So the lesson is, don't necessarily just chase the money because the money's hard to get. That's one thing I would take away. The other piece with regards to COVID, at least for our business, it was really tough. We had only been existing for about 18 months. We were trying to grow our service company, and we depended on these companies to grow and to thrive. And when nobody could make decisions, it certainly impacted our company to a great extent. But then one of the things that happened is people started, the healthcare is recalcitrant to technology improvements. It's the last, unfortunately, it's the last area to really adopt technology, and research, the area that I'm in, is the last of the last. I mean, we, want to see paper and wet ink signatures and silly things, but it did help with sort of the influx of technology. And companies are, when the FDA would say, well, we wouldn't necessarily entertain a trial or evidence in a decentralized model in the past. Now they've certainly opened back up and reevaluated that, that viewpoint, at least for trials that can be done. Allowing technology to facilitate decentralized trials. So I think for our standpoint, we've certainly seen a big jump in the ability to utilize technology and to make it more cost efficient for the companies, and to run those trials quicker, where we can get things quicker to market. So I would say if there was anything good that came of that, it would certainly be that.
And getting rid of fax machines, I'm guessing.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that, because on Thursday, I just got, it was a protocol in, and I'm not kidding you, there was a component in there with a fax in there, but I hope we are like squashing those bugs as much as we can, but there's still a few fax machines.
Joanna, one other impact of COVID. So, we're selling devices, which, as I mentioned earlier, are gadgets. So, and physicians have to be taught, or the care team has to be taught how to use it. When do you pull the lever? When do you push the plunger? And, physicians, as I always put it, is they know the ocean. We just know the small cup of water and we know it better than them. And you have to be present in order to be in, and we're, it's called case coverage. You're in there, in the case, with the patient on the table, and you're telling the physician, when to pull the lever or push the plunger. We couldn't have access to hospitals because of COVID restrictions. You just weren't allowed in. I mean, family members weren't allowed in. So why would a rep be able to be allowed in? And that created a significant impact, especially for a company trying to commercialize. You just couldn't have access. Therefore, you just weren't going to be able to sell a product. Secondarily, to Kevin's point, some companies that sort of pivoted into this are these companies, like there's one of our board members has co-founded a company called Avail. And this is a fully connected into their imaging system, fully connected into the hospital's EMR. And they basically, the rep sits at home or wherever they are in the world and can essentially see everything that's going on with the case and advise the physician on basically providing them case coverage as if they were in the operating room. And that, they got $140 million of funding and then they're off to the races. But it's a great example of how a company pivoted and technology enabled.
Yeah, I think another example of how COVID actually might have changed our universe for the better is talent, right? So I think the talent piece, I think even, again, just like we were a little bit old school about pen and paper, I think a lot of medical device companies do want their folks kind of in one spot, not remote, all of that. And I think because we had to figure that out, it accelerated our ability as an industry to do that. You're still always going to need, engineers and folks like that to be able to co-locate and tinker and all of those things. But I think, at least for a lot of my portfolio companies, they were able to go recruit talent from places that, they would not have been able to access before, would not even have considered before, simply because they weren't really thinking about, weren't set up for remote work. I guess to build, we've talked a lot about Houston, but I just kind of want to focus on that for a minute. We all co-locate in the same building, and just kind of by coincidence, Kevin and I officed together many, many years ago, almost a decade ago, while I was an early employee at Saranas. So there's a lot of, I think, interwovenness in our ecosystem in Houston. How have, James, you've kind of been in and out of it. Kevin, you've been here for a while. How have you guys seen it change and grow over the last few years?
So my experience, like I said, I was with Boston Scientific many years, lived literally all over the world until I came to Houston. And then when I got to Houston, I was at Cyberonics, was then Cyberonics, now LeVinova. And the CEO who brought me in had about a year left on his contract. The board did an internal process, and they said, yeah, Reinstein, you're the guy, you're going to replace him. But then they signed him on for 4 more years. So, which was great for the company, great for him, great for everybody except James. And I thought, all right, well, you're a board who knows me better than anyone else. Do you think I'm ready to run one of these? It's not going to happen at this company. And quite frankly, it's not going to happen in Houston because it just didn't exist. So that's when I moved out to California, went to the Bay Area, and ran a company, sold it to Medtronic. And then this is now, Saranas will be my 4th one. But about 3 years ago, I called Ann Tanabe with BioHouston, who I've known for years, and said, what's going on in Houston? Is there something for me to come back to? I would love to get back. My family loved it. It was like a crime against humanity that we left in the beginning. And I kept saying, it's California, though. But nonetheless, and then I discovered the TMCX, and then I discovered that there's some funding, and quite frankly, what they needed were more guys like me and gals like me that had some experience and wanted to bring it back to the Houston marketplace. So I was, in fact, I even met with now the former CEO of Saranas. He now works with me, not knowing that I would be running the company. But I said to him, I said, man, I know that playbook. I ran it. That's what I did at Aptus, and let me help you. I'm a pay it forward kind of guy, and not knowing that I would actually take his job, but he's still in the company, and he's actually a great contributor. He works with Kevin on the clinical study that we're running. But it was almost 10 years that, in my mind, it took for there to be something for someone with my experience level to come back to. And it's not there in spades, but it's certainly, a heck of a lot more than there was a decade ago.
Yeah, and I'll give you my perspective. So I've been in the life science business for 20 years. A lot of that has been on the pharma side and the biotech side, and recently, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've gotten into the MedTech side. But around 11 years ago, I worked for an organization, a contract research organization, and I had a team of people that did business development, and we covered regionally the United States. And I remember specifically the conversation about whether we placed somebody in the Houston or Texas area, and I remember saying, absolutely not. There's nothing going on there. There is, very few companies there. There's spread out. It's just not worth having anyone in this area. And, folks would say, well, what about all the healthcare and the hospitals there? No, there's no way I would put anyone there. And I stand behind that decision back then. Today, I can't think of anywhere else I would rather be, honestly. The ecosystem, as we use that word so often, has changed so much in the Houston area. 10 years or so ago, they built, when Joanna was telling you the story, we officed over at Rice. We were in this little incubator that unfortunately it was state supported, and the grant ran out, so they were just building the TMC Innovation Center, and we had a home to go to. And so we came over with our respective companies, and the vision of that place really captured the imagination of really everyone around in Texas, and I think certainly in Houston. There's a lot of energy there. There's now been 400 or 500 companies that's run through the Texas Medical Center Innovation Program. It brought all of these garage-type, med device people that literally were creating their devices at home or in the garage, brought them all out, got them in the open, got everyone colliding into each other. And so that really started to catalyze the change. And now you're seeing some companies finally starting to exit. I was very fortunate, and Joanna knows that this company, I was a company, Volumetric Bio. So that was a company that came out of Rice about 3.5 years ago. It was a 3D printing technology. They had proprietary bioinks and making their own printers, and I had the opportunity to be on their board. And that company in 3 years went from zero to selling for right around $400 million, assuming they hit all their milestones. That happened in 3 years in Houston. The guys stayed there, and I think the great thing is that not only are they staying there, but the company that acquired them, 3D Systems, have committed to developing a biomanufacturing facility in East Downtown in Houston. And you also see other manufacturers committing to the Houston area. You got Lonza, that's just south of the Houston area. It's got a 300,000 square foot facility. If you guys hang around for the next presenter, you're going to hear from James Bach at MD Anderson. They've got 2 manufacturing cell and gene therapy manufacturing facilities that they're spinning up over there. I think, you can tell I'm excited about Houston. And for a guy that grew up in Arkansas and said he'd never live in Texas, I couldn't think of anywhere else I would want to be other than Houston. The cost of developing technology is cheap here. Manufacturing's really taken off. You've got everyone co-locating into an area within this space, and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think, I'm not a Houstonian, not a Texan, but actually moved to Houston to attend Rice to get my degree in bioengineering there, and then have not been able to leave because the opportunities have just kind of exploded, especially over the last decade or so. I think it was 2013, 2014. So for those of you not familiar, the Texas Medical Center is the largest medical center in the world, and there's a nonprofit that actually owns all the land under those hospitals. And 2013, 2014, they decided to start putting some of the dollars that they get from parking and other services that they provide into innovation. So that then served as a catalyst for the space that we all kind of work in. There's several hundred companies that have come through there. J&J has both our Center for Device Innovation and J Labs there. ABB has a healthcare robotics center there. Lots of early stage, mid stage startups, and it's really cool to be in a space where everyone is dedicated to life sciences, whatever version of that they're working on, and that you can bump into somebody in the cafeteria and get a real conversation that might change your company's strategy through that. So that I think that's definitely one of the most exciting ways that Houston's ecosystem has evolved in the last few years. I just have one more question. I guess we'll open up to audience questions after that. But I'm curious, what have you guys seen, whether it's a technology company, whatever, that gets you excited about kind of the future of MedTech right now? Either company that's already on the market that you're excited about, or something that you've seen that's pretty early.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Again, I'll go back to the volumetric analogy, regenerative medicine, synthetic biology. I think that has the opportunity to truly, I hate this word, but disrupt the entire pharmaceutical and medical device industry to a great extent. I really believe that synthetic biology is going to make a huge difference, and the costs are coming down tremendously. The technology's moving in such a fast way, faster than Moore's Law. So synthetic biology and regenerative medicine really get me going. And then certainly AI and ML applications, whether those are pure medical device or MedTech applications, or whether they're bolted onto a device like a Saranas bleed detection device. I think looking at our numbers, the number of pure software as a medical device companies that we've seen has grown 40% year over year, which is actually pretty close to like the numbers you see in the industry. Forbes saying that the software and health tech is growing at a 50% CAGR. We're certainly seeing that. So AI and ML applications, whether those being pure MedTech and not any longer monitoring devices, but pure medical devices, I think that's huge. And then regenerative medicine, particularly in Houston, that's going to be really, really big.
Yeah, I went to or came to Houston 15 years ago to join a company called Cyberonics. This is a neurostimulation, neuromodulation company. And at the time I said, wow, the next frontier in medical devices is neuromodulation. And I still believe that, and it's certainly burgeoned since then. I mean, the device that we had at Cyberonics was for people that were afflicted with seizures. Basically a pacemaker that sat in the chest, a lead that stimulated the vagus nerve only in the neck but affected the brain and reduced the number of seizures, maybe even the severity. And then that evolved into basically being able to detect the seizure before it would occur based on a heart rhythm change, which would occur anywhere from 120 to 60 seconds before the physical onset of a seizure. So basically you're making these devices that much smarter and sort of closing the loop. That was 10 years ago. So I mean, the evolution, and now you've got Elon Musk talking about the whole Neuronex and what he's doing there. But I just think that whole industry can maybe even combined with the synthetics that Kevin was talking about and AI. I really believe that's what gets me excited. I'm still work with a lot of companies in that space, and I think that's where I'll probably remain for the rest of my career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
even though I'm running an endovascular company now.
I think the intersection of software becoming more and more part of our world, and all the stuff that comes with that, AI, all of that, is definitely, I think, really interesting, especially over the last couple of years. I think a couple of other trends that I've seen that get me excited is more both devices and digital health solutions that are thinking about how to address mental health in a new way, whether that's anxiety or clinical depression or different things like that, PTSD. And then also, just in the last few years, have seen an explosion of companies that are specifically working on femtech, so solutions that target female patients. There's a company called Materna Medical that partners with some folks in UTMB Galveston, just south of us, that's essentially working on making childbirth less awful, which is, it's about time. So with that, I will open up to questions. If anyone has questions, if you wouldn't mind using one of the microphones kind of towards the back of the room, we'd appreciate that.
California now. So I was out here in Austin for decades, and I now work for AbbVie for several years out in Southern California. So as being part of biopharma, I was wondering, in this experience that y'all are discussing in Houston, which sounds wonderful, what is the intersection between, the strategic leaders? Like, how are y'all deciding on what are the next medical technologies, devices, et cetera? Is it purely from a peer-to-peer level where you've got research scientists and doctors defining, oh, this would be a great device, right? Because, James, you mentioned your 4 questions. Or is it a greater matrix of, this would overall improve, healthcare system, care pathways. It would also improve, use and outcomes of certain products, et cetera, right? So I'm just trying to get a better understanding, like, what's going on at the, this innovation center in Houston.
Sure,
You're
yeah.
doing some of that?
Yeah, I think, so definitely, there's, companies like J&J, ABB, where the focus is really how do we, the product lines that we already have, the spaces that we're already in, where we're kind of already experts in, how do we find technologies that are going to continue to build kind of our expertise and our presence in those fields? I think that's kind of a gimme for kind of our, the corporate partners within within the Innovation Institute. The accelerator, I think, though, which is kind of the program that a lot of these companies come through, Saranas has been through it. I'm sure Kevin has, a lot of companies have come to Proxima through there, and a lot of my resident companies have come through there as well. They engage across their member institutions, so the actual hospitals, to try and figure out, is this a technology that is going to impact you? And that's not just talking to physicians, that's talking to the administrators, the people that ultimately decide if I'm going to buy this product, right? Even if the physician wants it, that's not necessarily something that's going to get bought and put on the shelves. So that's an aspect of how they think about what comes in. Is there somebody in the medical center that can vouch for this technology and say, absolutely, when that hits the market, not only would I need it or use it, but I would pay for it. I think that's kind of a basis of how we look at stuff, but also pretty broad. I don't know if, Kevin, do you have anything on that?
Well, we just started our accelerator, M1 MedTech, and that's embedded within the Texas Medical Center. We're recruiting physician and scientific leadership to make decisions on what companies we want to be part of that. But not only that is getting the physicians involved with and KOLs involved with how we deploy our capital. We've raised a small fund, and I'll put a little plug out. We're looking for help. We're looking for partners there, so folks that that can help us make those decisions. We're actually looking for that leadership. I'd say within the MedTech community within Houston, a lot of that's just being handled by things like the TMC, by J-Labs, by all of those groups, each one of them having sort of a separate focus and a separate bent on how that they look at technology and then bring that technology forward, so it's kind of evolving.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, from the perspective of an investor, and quite frankly, TMCX letting companies come in and incubate is acting as somewhat of an investor. They're thinking about it with the end in mind. What ultimately does this product do to impact healthcare? financial, patient benefit, throughput, does it make the profitability for the hospital greater or less? A lot of that has to do with the reimbursement, but that always is sort of what is, and I think what you're asking is, what do you have to get through the gate, and it's really what is it you're going to have when you get out the other side, and that's the way you got to think about it.
All right, thanks.
Is it on?
So I'm a physician at University of Pennsylvania where I run a trials unit. And so I was really interested in what you said earlier about that there's a lot of resistance from academia and healthcare in general about devices. So I want to hear your perspective on what are the barriers you faced, what type of issues come up that you feel are challenging your field.
So just so I can clarify, you mean from the perspective of getting a product commercialized or funded or developed?
It's something in the beginning, you guys said that one of the big barriers you have is sort of resistance from the healthcare systems in general, or physicians in general, or medical centers, et cetera.
Yeah, so we're now commercializing. Got a product that's FDA approved. We are adjunctive to an existing procedure, so valve replacement procedure would be one of those. So that has a specific DRG or reimbursement. However, it's capped, and the hospital isn't going to get more or less if they use our product. Quite frankly, they end up with less because our product cost goes into that cap. So we have to demonstrate, and we don't have a special reimbursement at this point, so we have to demonstrate some type of rationale for the hospital to use it. And this is exactly what I faced in the first company I ran in Aptus, where we were adjunctive to the AAA stent graft replacements. The process of doing that is you find a clinician, a physician champion that he or she is willing and able to drive it through the bureaucracy. And there's all sorts of acronyms of VACs and value-added committees, and they decide, okay, well, yes, this makes sense for X, Y, and Z reason. And there's a number of different reasons. One is, okay, there is reimbursement, it's going to be paid for, there's no problem. The physicians want it. Or it's an ability to attract patients. We may lose money on that procedure, but that's a very valuable patient to our system because they're going to have CTs and MRIs, and that patient's valuable to our system, so we want to attract that patient to our system. Or a litany of other reasons, and as a company, you've got to provide that rationale, and that all goes into your value assessment committee dossier.
Yeah, and I'll say from the R&D perspective, I'm glad you asked the question because just in the last, I'd say probably 4 months, I've had 3 medical device companies that unfortunately, like after years of planning to do their study here in the US and do their pivotal trial, they had to stop it because it was too expensive to do their trial. And now they're going outside the US. COVID has created a lot of things, and one of them being, I don't know if it was COVID or what, but this thing, the Great Resignation, and it's been really difficult with trying to secure talent to work. Folks are changing jobs, and in the life sciences that is no different. It's also created a lot of pressure on hospitals and how they've had to recruit people, had to pay more in salaries, and they've had to push those costs back to people like me to conduct those trials. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, I think it'll run its course, at least I hope it does, here in the next year and a half. But costs right now to conduct trials at places, not Pennsylvania in particular, but I think any of the larger academic medical centers, it's too damn expensive, and it's really impacting research.
Yeah. But it's interesting, pharma faces the same problems with typical drug development.
Absolutely.
But manages to get past it. And that's what I'm trying to reconcile. Your issue is really more the misaligned incentives that happen a lot of times in trying to adopt a device that may or may not make sense, and it helps patients in some senses. But your issue is really more what farmers dealt with for years, I guess, of course, is how does the MedTech industry overcome those issues?
Oh, I absolutely blame the pharma and large medical device industry. And if you're, hear from there, I'll, we talk in the back of the room. But that
is that like I'm going to meet you outside?
No, but the large life science companies, not necessarily the hospitals, but the large life science companies have created. So I'll just say, in one of the lower level people in my industry, I saw an advertisement for them for that position at a pharmaceutical company. They were making as much as I'm making as a CEO of a 100-person company in Houston, Texas. And so that is very, very challenging. And again, if you want to argue the point, we can. But I'm not saying there was a way around it. It's happening across all industries. It's happening in oil and gas and education and everything. But right now, this exuberance and overinflation in the talent pool and salaries and costs are really starting to have an effect. And it breaks my heart that this company, the one that just happened 2 weeks ago, we've been working with this company for almost 2 years now, planning their launch, and then we pulled the plug on the whole thing, and it's going to Europe. It's just quite unfortunate.
Well, this might be a good segue question. I'm a MedTech communicator, and storytelling is a really big thing for me. So in light of that, and all of the challenges that many industries have been experiencing, what are the stories that have been difficult to tell, and how have you reframed them so they better resonate with publics and stakeholders?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like all wound up from the last question. But one of the things, my colleague and I, we were over catching some of the pitches with consumer goods and global health and others. And I gotta say, the health care, MedTech, and biotech space, we don't do a very good job telling stories. We really don't. In fact, if any of you are out there in the startup space or thinking about starting up your company or in the middle of doing it, go watch some of these pitches that are in the consumer space. And I think because, so one thing I would say is a lot of these companies are founded by scientists and physicians that are technical people and are used to speaking at meetings, and they talk about the stats and how the technology works, and all that's great, but they never tell the story about the patient, or they never tell like that story that's very easy for the rest of us to digest. And there are a lot of groups like the Texas Medical Center's innovation program. We're starting our accelerator. We are trying to bring in a component of that curriculum of storytelling into that. In fact, we have a group that we're working with. It's a marketing and medical marketing group. They build websites and technology, and I think you guys know them, but they're actually coming into the first cohort of our accelerator to help with storytelling. And it's critically important, and I don't have any things to say, well, if you do this, it'll make it better, but gosh, there's just a huge chasm between MedTech and biotech storytelling and what I've seen from the rest of everything else.
And I guess if you're going out looking for funding, have a couple meetings with some friendly VCs. They are out there. And go out and just say, what do you want to hear? Does it, in what order? And that basically lays out your pitch deck. One story we keep trying to tell to hospitals is the story they hear from every single vendor that walks in. If you use my product, you'll save money. Well, prove it. And it sort of goes back to what I said. That's got to be one of the four. You got to be able to prove that.
I think another story that we need to be better at as an industry is really not spinning necessarily, but thinking about how our industry is portrayed to like the general public, right? Because if you go to Netflix, there's several documentaries that don't make us look very good. I think the reality of our world is, I don't think any of us want to put a product out on the market that would ever, hurt anyone, do anything like that. And most people in our world are very careful, do all the things they have to, jump through all the hoops. But at the end of the day, it's not an app. Human biology is complex. It's really challenging to build something, whether that's a therapeutic or a device or whatever it might be, that's going to work for every person. And so I think that's a narrative that's out there with the general public that, maybe the medical device world isn't careful enough or is, too focused on profits and not enough on patients. That's not what I see at all in our world. And I hope that's not what you see in your communities as well. And so I think there's definitely the need to think about how do we then portray the patient focus of our world of our industry to the general public.
And you should care about your brand and your collateral and all of that just as you start to put your company together. I got to plug Joanna. To this day, so she was involved early in Saranas, and to this day, the Saranas pitch deck is the early one is the gold standard of all pitch decks I've ever seen. I don't know but I've told so many people this, and it was because I think you guys cared about the way things looked and how you told that story early on. And I'm so glad I got to say that in public, because I've said it to like 20 people. You should care about it. You shouldn't just care about your technology. You should care about that brand and that storytelling.
Yeah, thank you. I'm from Newhouse School of Syracuse University, and basically we are a communication school. So my question is about storytelling as well. So thank you so much for sharing all your insights and teach us how to do something that we as communicators need to do. So thank you. My question is basically just, answer. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jessica Bussert. I'm the founder and CEO of Wave Therapeutics. We've created the first affordable and effective smart cushioning technology to prevent and treat bed sores. What I want to talk to you about is we're trying to buck the system a little bit as it currently is. Right now, it seems like the U.S. medical environment wants to keep people chronically ill so we can milk that cash cow as long as possible. And Wave is trying to produce an affordable device so that we can do a quantity sale and quickly become the standard of care. Now, when I'm approaching investors that have worked in the device space for a long time, they're saying, if I work better than the $5,000 devices that are out there, why aren't I $6,000 or $7,000? And they don't get it, that we're trying to make this an affordable technology that everybody can get so we can do the quantity sales. How do I spin that messaging in a way that's a little more palatable I think I'm doing it. I'm getting some investors, but any tips to improve that messaging would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I think I think one of the challenges definitely is if you're going to traditional investors with that traditional mindset, again, they have a fiduciary responsibility, right, to whoever's invested in their fund or whatever it might be, to make sure they're making the best investment possible. And I think that the struggle with creating something that's affordable is that even if it's a better device, then the right thing to do, and from a capitalistic sense, is to go charge a premium for that. I think one thing that we've started to see in the last few years is more and more funds that are focused not just on healthcare, but impact within healthcare, so serving underserved populations, global health, other things like that. So a lot of those things used to be exclusively focused on global health and used to be nonprofits or things like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, stuff like that. But we've seen more and more now actual funds focused on how do we make solutions that make care more affordable here in our backyards, right? In rural populations or, you know, under hospitalized populations, essentially. So I think maybe it's a question too of finding the right partner, because ultimately you don't want an investor that's pushing you to do something, you know, that you don't believe in as a founder. So I don't know if that helps your narrative, but I think there's a piece to that for sure.
Yeah, I have some thoughts too. I think we only have 2 minutes left, so we talk in the back of the room. I'd be happy to talk to you. Yeah.
I'd like that. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Appreciate it. You know, the pushback that I've given them is, do they recall who the market leader in the fountain pen space was? And no, nobody knows who that was, because BIC came along with a cheap, affordable product that worked better than anything else, and that's what we all use. And that's what Wave is going to do in this space as well. So thank you for your answers, and I'll connect up afterwards. Thanks.
I guess we'll take one last question.
Yeah, so one last question, and I'll make it quick. You noticed that there's kind of a big problem in the clinical trial space. It's too big, it's too hard to get this stuff done. Quick question, how do you disrupt that? Or at least where do you start? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, one thing is to allow us as a clinical trial company to come in and monitor the medical record without having to send somebody in. It'll take out half of all the costs in the clinical trial system. Open the medical device, the EMR and the records up so that I don't have to fly someone in and monitor that and charge James for it. So I take an employee, put him on a plane. That employee is, you know, billing from the time they're taking off, from the time they, you know, monitor that data, come back. It is really expensive to do it. If there is a way that we can, and it's happening slowly, but if we could accelerate that, that would be probably one of the biggest changes I could ever imagine. And then supporting decentralized trials as much as possible, that would be the other thing.
Cool, thank you.
Wrapping it up.
We're wrapping it up. Well, thank you for your question. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll be in the back to answer any additional questions that you have.